Welcome to The Real Debrief, the show where we dive deep into the world of film production, exploring the genres you love, the projects making waves, and the trends shaping the industry. We're here to give you a 360-degree review for entertainment professionals. So grab your popcorn and get ready for some expert insights. And, well, the occasional bed joke from Talen. It's The Real Debrief. Now your hosts, Talen and Lisa.
Welcome. You're back with us for another episode of Flops, Hits, and everything in between. I'm Talen, and joining me as always is the brilliant Lisa, the keeper of all things film lore. I'm telling you, if it happened in Hollywood, Lisa's got the receipts.
Thanks, Talen. Though today, we're diving into a subject where Hollywood's receipts might be in the negative. We're talking about a fascinating phenomenon that we film buffs love to dissect, the auteuristic flop. Specifically, we're going to break down the wild ride that is Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, a movie that was over 40 years in the making and, well, depending on who you ask, it's either a misunderstood masterpiece or a colossal failure.
Ah, yes. Megalopolis. The movie that has more lore behind it than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, it's the kind of story you almost can't believe. Coppola, the genius behind The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, spent decades trying to make this film, and finally, after selling a chunk of his wine business at the age of 85, he made it happen. And what do we get? A $140 million box office flop.
It's wild, right? There's just something about a legendary director putting their heart and soul into a passion project, only for it to bomb so hard. It's the epitome of the auteuristic flop. Coppola's not the first to experience this, and he won't be the last. These aren't your run-of-the-mill cash grab failures. These are the projects where a director really goes for it and, well, flies too close to the sun.
Exactly. I mean, it's like you've got your standard Hollywood flops, movies that were made by committee designed to make money but end up flopping because, well, they were bad or just didn't connect. Then you've got these auteurist flops where someone like Coppola or Kevin Costner, Waterworld anyone, gets to play out their wildest dreams with a massive budget. And then, boom! Watch it crash and burn.
Yes, and what's fascinating is how Megalopolis fits into this long history of auteuristic flops. We're talking about films like Heaven's Gate, Ishtar, and even Cleopatra from back in the 60s, which nearly bankrupt a studio. There's this almost perverse pleasure in watching these big, ambitious projects fall apart. It's like we, as an audience, are fascinated by the high-stakes failure.
Yeah, and let's be honest, part of it is because it's fun to watch someone who's been so successful fail. It's like seeing a rock star totally bomb a concert. You just don't expect it. I think there's this narrative, especially in America, where we love to build someone up and then tear them down. But in the case of these auteur directors, it's even juicier because they're the ones who pushed the limits, right?
Exactly. And it's funny you mentioned Heaven's Gate because Megalopolis has been compared to that movie a lot. Both were these highly anticipated projects from directors coming off the high of previous successes. In Heaven's Gate, Michael Cimino had just won an Oscar for The Deer Hunter, and everyone thought its next film would be a masterpiece. But it ballooned out of control and became one of Hollywood's biggest disasters.
Right. And people were so quick to pronounce Cimino with the whole, he's too big for his britches narrative. Like, the guy couldn't even sneeze without somebody accusing him of wasting millions on tissues. But with Coppola, it's a little different, don't you think? He's not some young gun like Cimino was. He's this 85-year-old living legend. So is anyone really going to tear him down for Megalopolis flopping?
That's such a great point. With Coppola, the narrative isn't he's too big for his britches. It's more like, well, he gave it one last shot, and even if it didn't work, his legacy is untouchable. I mean, the man made Godfather, Apocalypse Now, His place in the pantheon of great directors is secure no matter what. So it's interesting how the discourse around Megalopolis is less about Coppola's ego and more about the public's fascination with these grand, personal visions that don't connect with audiences.
Totally. It's like the difference between watching someone at the beginning of their career crash and burn versus watching a legend just, experiment and miss. With Coppola, it's like he earned the right to flop, you know? Like, if you're going to fail, you might as well do it with style.
Exactly. And it's not like Coppola was trying to make a safe movie. Megalopolis is weird. It's this huge, sprawling personal vision about architecture and society and overcoming obstacles. It's not your typical box office bait. And honestly, that's what makes it an auteuristic flop. Coppola wasn't making this for anyone but himself.
And let's be real, that's part of why it bombed. I mean, people weren't exactly running to the theaters like they were for Avatar or Spider-Man: No Way Home. You've got to hand it to Coppola, though. He never plays it safe. But at the end of the day, movies like Megalopolis just don't have that mainstream appeal.
Yeah, and that's where it gets interesting. We talk a lot about how Hollywood is a business. Movies need to make money or they're considered failures. But what happens when a movie isn't about making money? Coppola's vision with Megalopolis clearly wasn't driven by a desire for box office success. It was personal. And I think that's what makes auteuristic flops so compelling to dissect.
Totally. And you know what's fascinating? Despite the terrible box office number, 4 million on opening weekend for a movie that cost $140 million, there are still critics who are defending this thing. They're saying that audiences just don't get it, that it's a misunderstood masterpiece. It's the classic, they'll appreciate it in 20 years argument, you know?
Right? And we've seen that before with other auteuristic flops. Take Blade Runner, for example. When it first came out, people didn't know what to make of it. It was considered a flop. But now, it's a sci-fi classic. There's always that possibility that movies like Megalopolis will find their audience down the line, once the initial shock of its failure wears off.
Yeah, but I don't know if Megalopolis has the same potential. I mean, Blade Runner had that cool futuristic aesthetic, and it was a sci-fi movie with mass appeal that was just ahead of its time. Megalopolis is, well, it's about an architect grappling with his personal demons. Not exactly something that screams cult classic, you know?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's definitely more niche. But you never know. We live in a time where obscure experimental films can find a second life on streaming platforms. So maybe Megalopolis will find its audience there. But I agree, it's not going to be an easy sell.
And speaking of streaming, that's another thing. Back in the day, movies had one shot to make it big. And if they flopped at the box office, that was it. But now with streaming services, there's a second chance for these kinds of films to get discovered. I mean, do you think Megalopolis could have a resurgence on Netflix or something? Like, hey, have you seen that weird Francis Ford Coppola movie from 2024?
It's definitely possible. I mean, look at what happened with The Irishman. Scorsese couldn't get that movie funded by a traditional studio, so he went to Netflix. And suddenly, it found an audience that was willing to sit through 3.5 hours of Robert De Niro aging backwards. Streaming services are more willing to take risks on these kinds of auteur projects, and audiences who might not have gone to the theater could give it a chance from the comfort of their own homes.
Yeah, but the difference with The Irishman is that it had Scorsese, De Niro, Pacino. It had that star power. Megalopolis has Adam Driver, sure, but it doesn't have that same draw for the average viewer. I think it's going to take a miracle, or at least a really good marketing campaign, to get Megalopolis trending on Netflix. Maybe a viral meme or two could give it some life. Like, when you spend $140 million on a movie and only make $4 million back. This is fine. With the dog and the burning house meme?
Oh my god, yes. A meme might be Megalopolis' best shot at redemption. But seriously, you're right. Without some major star power to pull in viewers or a plot that's easy to digest, it's going to be an uphill battle. But who knows? Stranger things have happened in the world of streaming. Sometimes all it takes is one influential critic or a well-placed recommendation to get people talking.
True. I mean, people love a good underdog story, right? Maybe Megalopolis will become that rare flop that everyone reconsiders, and suddenly it's the next big thing in film schools. How did we all miss this hidden gem, is what they'll say.
It could happen. And there's this whole concept of auteuristic flops that actually makes them more compelling because they're misunderstood. They challenge the audience, and sometimes they don't get appreciated until years later. I think there's something kind of romantic about that idea, this notion that maybe, just maybe, Coppola's vision was ahead of its time, and we're all just too cynical or too mainstream to understand it right now.
And that's definitely part of the allure with these auteurist flops. You've got people who genuinely believe that they were misunderstood and that the director was operating on some higher artistic level. Like, man, you don't get it. It's about the art. And I'm sure Coppola would love to see his movie have that kind of legacy, where it's remembered as a misunderstood masterpiece.
Yeah, it's like the Van Gogh effect, right? He wasn't appreciated in his time, but now his work is priceless. Maybe Megalopolis will be Coppola's cinematic Starry Night.
I mean, that's a lofty comparison, but hey, why not? Maybe in 100 years, people will be sitting in film study classes watching Megalopolis and talking about how it was a misunderstood work of genius. Or maybe it'll just be a fun trivia question about expensive flops. Who's to say?
Exactly. And that's what makes these auteuristic flops so intriguing to discuss. On one hand, they're fascinating failures. And on the other, there's this possibility that we're all just missing something brilliant. It's a gamble every time a director decides to go all in on their vision. And sometimes it pays off. And sometimes, well, you get Megalopolis.
Yeah, and let's not forget, we've seen some of these auteurist flops get rehabilitated over time. Heaven's Gate, for example, was destroyed by critics when it came out, but now it's being reappraised as a flawed masterpiece. Who's to say that Megalopolis won't follow a similar trajectory?
Right, there's always that chance. And while Megalopolis might be a box office disaster now, there's a part of me that wonders if the story of its failure will end up being more compelling than the movie itself. There's something so inherently dramatic about a director like Coppola pouring his heart and soul into a project only for it to crash and burn.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. Sometimes the story of the movie is more interesting than the movie itself, right? The behind-the-scenes drama, the years of effort, the budget spiraling out of control, all of that adds to the movie's legacy. Whether it's good or bad, people are going to remember Megalopolis for those reasons, even if they never actually watch it.
Totally. It's kind of like Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor. The movie itself is a bit of a slog, but the drama behind the scenes, Taylor's affair with Richard Burton, the skyrocketing budget, the fact that it almost destroyed 20th Century Fox, that's what makes it legendary.
Exactly. It's the spectacle of it all, right? And that's the thing about auteurist flops. They're not just movies, they're events. They're these massive, overblown, beautiful messes that leave people talking for years. Sure, maybe Megalopolis didn't work, but it's still going to be part of the conversation for a long time.
And that, in itself, is a kind of success, isn't it? Coppola's name is going to be attached to this movie forever, and people will always be curious about it. There's a kind of morbid fascination with these grand, ambitious failures. We want to know what went wrong, why it didn't work, and whether we missed something.
Yeah, it's like a car crash. You just can't look away. But in a more artistic sense, of course. And for Coppola, this was personal. It's clear that Megalopolis was a passion project, and you've got to respect that, even if it didn't land the way he had hoped.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, Coppola did get to make his dream movie. He funded it himself. He made the movie he wanted to make, and now it exists. That's more than most filmmakers can say. So even if it's a flop by box office standards, it's still a win for him on a personal level.
True. I mean, there's something admirable about that kind of dedication. He sold off part of his wine business just to finance the movie. I mean, that's commitment. How many directors would go that far just to get their vision on screen, huh?
Not many. And that's part of what makes Megalopolis so fascinating. It's a movie that exists against all odds, funded by the passion and determination of its creator. So maybe it didn't make a ton of money, but it's still this incredible testament to what one person can accomplish when they're willing to take a huge risk.
And you know what? Even if Megalopolis ends up being remembered as a flop, it's still going to inspire people. I mean, it's going to be that movie that young filmmakers look at and say, if Coppola could risk it all for his art, maybe I can too. So in that sense, I mean, I'd say it's still a win.
Totally. And isn't that what film is all about at the end of the day? Taking risks, pushing boundaries, and making something that's true to your vision? Whether it's a success or a failure, Megalopolis is a reminder that sometimes the most important thing is just having the courage to try.
Amen to that. So, what's the takeaway here, Lisa? Is Megalopolis a flop? Yes, but is it also a fascinating, ambitious, auteur-driven piece of art that's going to be studied and dissected for years to come? Also, yes.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a flop, but it's our flop. And we'll be talking about it for years. And that's a legacy worth having, even if it's not the one Coppola might have hoped for.
Well, there you have it, folks. Megalopolis might not have taken the world by storm, but it's certainly given us plenty to think about. And who knows, maybe in 20 years, we'll all be calling it a misunderstood masterpiece. Or maybe it'll still just be a really expensive flop. Only time will tell.
And either way, it'll still be fun to talk about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of auteuristic flops. We'll be back next time with more film talk, more hot takes, and probably a few more bad movie puns.
Oh, you can absolutely count on the puns. We'll see you next time, folks. And remember, if you're going to flop, flop big.
Flop with style.
This has been The Real Debrief. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, like, rate, and review. We'll see you soon on The Real Debrief.